Well, hello there. Happy Sunday, friends and art lovers. Thank you for joining me and Amy. This is 5 Minutes with Robert Nasir, and we are so glad you're here. Today is Sunday, July 12th, the 194th day of 2020. We made it to 194, with 111 days until Halloween.
All right.
And 166 days until Christmas.
I like the 111 days. I like that.
Well, I usually save Halloween for last. This time we're saving Christmas for last.
Okay.
Why are we saving Christmas for last? Because just like last week, we have an early Christmas present for you. We welcome
Christmas.
to 5 Minutes with Robert Nasir. It's Quent Cordair.
Hey, wow.
Quent, how are you doing today? Thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, thank you. I'm on. Wonderful. Doing very well. Thank you. Thank you for having me on.
Outstanding.
It's our pleasure, for sure. Oh, my goodness.
It's our early Christmas. Well, we did this last week with the esteemed Linda Cordair.
Yes.
This is our early Christmas present to all of our 5 Minutes podcast listeners. This is outstanding.
It's amazing.
Christmas in July. That's one good thing about 2020.
There you go.
I've been thinking about Christmas lately, and I kind of want it, actually, right now.
July 12th, 2020. And on this day in history, I'm going to fix my cameras real quick here. We have to shuffle things around. We need a producer. We need a permanent producer here to manage things for us. And there we go.
Awesome.
On this day in history, the future sheriff of Hayes City and the marshal of Abilene, Wild Bill Hickok, had his first gunfight.
Wild Bill Hickok.
Wild Bill Hickok.
Excellent.
In the summer of 1861, on this day, Hickok was working as a stock tender at a stage depot in Nebraska called Rock Creek Station. Across the creek lived David McCannels, a mean-spirited man who disliked Hickok. McCannels enjoyed insulting the young stockman, called him Duck Bill, and claiming he was a hermaphrodite, a word I don't even think is politically correct in 2020.
Huh. That's very strange.
Well, Bill Hickok took his revenge by secretly romancing McCannell's mistress, Sarah Shull.
Well.
McCannell's was an older man. On this day in 1861, the tension between Hickok and McCannell's came to a head. McCannell's may have learned about the affair between Shull and Hickok, though his motivations are not clearly documented. He arrived at the station with two older men and his 12-year-old son and exchanged angry words with the station manager. McCannell spotted Hickok standing behind a curtain partition and threatened to drag Duck Bill outside and give him a thrashing. Demonstrating remarkable coolness for a 24-year-old who had never been involved in a gunfight, Hickok replied, "Oh, there'll be one less son of a bitch when you try that."
Well.
McCannels ignored the warning. When he approached the curtain, Hickok shot him in the chest.
Oh.
McCannels staggered out of the building, died in the arms of his son. Hearing the shots, the two other gunmen he'd brought with him ran in. Hickok shot one of them twice and winged the other. And the other workers of the station finished that one off. So you see, you don't mess around with Bill.
So, Quint, I'm sure that you experience that kind of thing all the time, that scene out in the wild west of California, so...
It can get pretty rough in Napa, particularly these days. So.
In Napa.
That's right.
We've avoided gunplay so far, but getting a little hairy there for a bit.
That's right. What's there's going to be a Wild Bill Hickok and the other guy from Antifa.
Also, today is Rachel Brosnahan's birthday.
Oh.
She turns 30 years old. So we say happy birthday to Mrs. Maisel.
Mrs. Maisel.
Maisel.
That's awesome.
A great TV show, The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel. If you're not watching it already, you should be. And make that happen. Also, tomorrow is Thomas Jefferson's 219th birthday.
Fantastic.
Which, as much as we love Mrs. Maisel, it's Thomas Jefferson is the man. Now, we usually start off the podcast with the podcast of the week, a show or other audio that I'm finding enriching or otherwise interesting or enjoyable. But this week, I'm listening to Robin Field, singer, musician, and orator, on Audible, because he is the reader for Quent Cordair's first two novels in the Idolatry series. So one of the first questions that I have for you, Quent, is how did that happen? The Idolatry series of 5 novels represents a much longer work. than the short stories and poetry you've done. Part 1, Genesis, was released in 2014, is that right?
That sounds about right.
Part 2, A New Eden, in 2016. And the multi-talented musician, singer, and orator Robin Field is the reader of the Audible versions. Is there a story there? Did you seek Robin out, or did he volunteer for that?
Well, we've known Robin for a while. He was, among many other things, he was part of our arts cruise that we did about a decade ago, and he was one of the actors in the play that we produced, the production of Monavana.
Right.
Tremendous job on that. So we got to see him on stage playing a role in Monavana in Hollywood, and then on our arts cruise through the Caribbean, and got to spend time with him there. And in addition to playing the role in the play, he also did a performance for us one night. I think it was the last night of the cruise, and just pulled out some of his wonderful stage work, piano and singing, and which is what he's most known for.
Yep.
But at some point, I discovered that he was doing, probably in conversation, that he was already doing audiobooks at that time, doing narration work, voice narration work, and coincidentally, particularly in part 2 of Idolatry, there is singing required, and it just turned out, with Robin's wonderful singing voice and his range, I thought maybe he could pull it off, and I asked him, and he said yes. Did a wonderful job.
That's a wonderful thing to ask somebody.
As it turns out, as it turns out, he plays the part of a charismatic fundamentalist minister very well. The man can preach, and who knew? But he did it brilliantly.
That's fantastic.
That was one thing I definitely did not expect was the singing, I was about to say gospel, but that's not the right word.
Hymnals.
Yes.
More traditional hymns mostly.
So the question then would be, you wrote a novel that includes hymns. Did you write the music, or did Robin write the music? Did he make up the melodies on the spot?
I asked him to come up with melodies on, I think, one of them, and I gave him a melody on one of the others. There's a just a brief stanza worth of verse worth of secular music, almost more like a Western waltz, that I have two of the characters dancing to in the middle of a bar. Two people who shouldn't be dancing together, and somebody asks somebody to dance and puts a coin in the jukebox, and they go around the floor a time or two. And I already had the melody for that one very much in my head, and I think I gave him that one. And one of the other hymns that didn't already exist, there's a number of hymns that do already have, that do exist in real life. And he went online on YouTube. I sent him some links. This is the way this one normally sounds. This is the way this one normally sounds. And I think I cut him loose on one other that had been made up from scratch and let him come up with. In fact, it was one that the Reverend Lundquist sings, and he did it perfectly. So, and he's a songwriter. So
yes, he's quite the musician and songwriter. So. Well, that's great. That again, listening to it, I thought, well, this is a perfect confluence of events to have Robin Field reading and even singing.
Mm-hmm.
We've had the great opportunity and luxury over the years to get to know and be involved with so many talented people, and including some of our artists in the gallery. I'm sure you already know that Brian Larson did the cover work on my Idolatry series novels. He already has the third cover done, even though I haven't finished it yet, and I know that question is coming. But it's great to work with people that are as accomplished as they are. I hate to say just talented, because it's not just talented. These artists work so hard to arrive at the level of skill and accomplishment that they have. It's wonderful to be able to work with.
Excellent. Quick technical note for folks who are listening on Facebook. If you have tried to get on YouTube, it looks like they're not accepting our stream. We've got a technical issue here. They're recommending restarting it, but I'd rather not interrupt. So if you're listening on Facebook, that's great. We'll put a note on YouTube or a note on my wall rather on Facebook to let folks know to listen there, which is kind of a shame since we're pushing our YouTube subscribers, but unfortunately YouTube's not behaving itself. So with that said, that's interesting to me that you say you had the melody in mind. Are you a musician as well? Or is it just came to mind and it was easy enough for you to explain that to Robin?
Musician as well. Not a musician. I grew up with music. Grew up in a church environment where there was music all the time, and played trombone in high school. So
nice. There you
have
go.
A little bit of musical background. But for something as simple as a melody, it's poetry with a little music behind it. And,
yeah.
So, yeah.
I love that. It's something as simple as a melody. I know people who know nothing about music, and they would be hard pressed to explain a melody to somebody. But if you've played an instrument, you know what music looks like.
Yeah.
Outstanding. Now, you were already a painter when you decided to open Quent Cordair Fine Art in 1996. Is that right?
Yes, by a couple of years. I had started. I'll have to back up just a little bit. I'll try to give you the shortest version of this that would make sense to people. After my first career choice was to be a fighter pilot in the military. I went into the Marine Corps, and I was on track to do that, and shifted after for various reasons that we could go into later or the next time. I decided that wasn't going to be quite fulfilling enough to me as a career choice, and after I got out of the Marine Corps, I chose fiction writing as something that I wanted to pursue. And the secondary choice that came with that is, well, how am I going to support myself while I'm pursuing that path? And I tried a number of different things, your typical service type jobs, waiting tables, doing really lower end minimum wage work, security guard, worked in a mail room in do you remember BMG Music where you had to do the little stamps?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
You put your 10 or 20 stamps on, and for 1 cent, they get you into the program. Well, there used to be a great big place where all that mail would come in and all the mail would go out. And I did that for a couple of months. Graveyard shift. Stocked groceries in a grocery store. Did that one graveyard shift as well. And several other things, but as it turned out, everything that I was trying to do just really left me emotionally drained by the end of the day. It wasn't going to work out. None of those things were going to work out long term, and have enough left to write with, enough left spiritually to write with.
Yeah.
So I started looking for something that I could do longer term that would be similar enough to the writing, something artistic I thought might work out better if I could pull it off. And I grew up around my dad's sign painting shops, and I did some auto body painting as well. And I worked in those shops in the summers and in the evenings. Sometimes I'd been around the paint, the materials. I had seen my dad do some fine art pieces kind of on the side. I knew it could be done. Saw real people do it. My sister had been going to art school at about the same time that I was going through these choices. She was bringing home projects. I had been helping her try to sell her work, portrait work, get some commissions, this, that, and the other. And at some point, I just decided, well, maybe I can pull this off. Maybe I can make enough money painting, commission work perhaps. So I started taking my easel to the park and started working on it, and went to the library and got books. And this was just before the internet was getting rolling. There wasn't much online back then. And learned enough how to do it where I could get started in the arts and crafts fairs, the little street fairs that you'll see around, and get my little 10 by 10 booth, and and a little bit of success with that, but it wasn't painting fast enough to get and couldn't put out enough good work fast enough to sell enough to make that work. And I was working on a large composition at the time, the lunch break image that's actually on the cover of that.
Nice. Yep, I know.
It's 5 feet wide by 7 feet tall.
Wow.
And the thing would not fit in my little apartment that I was living in. I'd had to do the reverse Michelangelo, where I'd be down on the ground, maybe doing the bottom 20% of it. And I was starting to look around for just a somewhat larger studio space, and I happened across a space that had very high ceilings that a realtor was showing me just a half a block from where I lived, and it was attached to this 10-foot wide kind of a hallway that ran right out to a very narrow storefront, but it was on in a pretty nice retail area of the town that I lived in. Well, I knew enough other artists by then. Some I had met at objectivist conferences, and others I had met elsewhere, and thought maybe by bringing in other artists' work, I can sell art out of the front while I'm painting in the back. And that's how Quent Cordair Fine Art got started 24 years ago.
Wow, 24 years ago. So when was the first time that you actually painted or did something, creative? Or, I mean, was it when you took your easel out to paint kind of en plein air kind of thing outside?
It wasn't really plein air as much. I started just working off, like a lot of people do, working off of photographs, and we're just setting up a little still life in the little apartment studio that I was living in, and started trying to do it that way. But then when I was trying to get commissions, and after I figured out, well, I can do the portraiture well enough that I can do the portrait in the park kind of thing. Let's just work outside for a few hours on weekends and see how that goes. And in fact, that's where I want to say that's not the way that story works. But one of the clients that we still have and has become a good friend over the years, met right there in Burlingame. It's south of here about an hour and a half. And she's still a good client to this day, even before we had the gallery open. And
nice.
I leased one of her dolls for a painting that I did of Hugo's Les Miserables, when Cosette's seeing the doll that Jean Valjean has gone off to the market and brought back to her to the Thénardier's bar. And I needed a doll to work with as a model for that, and I found her right there in that same community, and she's been with us ever after. The lady who owned the doll shop that I got the doll from. But that was a bit of a tangent.
Oh, no,
Uh,
that's great. That's very, very sweet. Yes. But in terms of like what or which art form do you enjoy the most, and in what way?
I enjoy the writing the most.
Okay.
Uh, yeah, and that's always been I won't say the first love of the arts, but again, well, storytelling was always part of my upbringing. Being
Mm-hmm.
in a kind of a deeply religious upbringing,
Mm-hmm.
there were a lot of Bible stories, a lot of children's versions of Bible stories.
Yes.
Every unlike some traditions in the I would say more in the Protestant traditions, there's a lot of not just Bible storytelling, but the sermons all usually involve stories. My grandmother wrote the Christmas plays for her church. Even almost before I could remember, I was a little shepherd boy sitting on my grandpa's lap up on the stage in the Christmas plays, and I um, really kind of fell for theater back when I was a kid,
Yeah.
and did that off and on through school at times, through high school, was in a musical, and then started doing local theater afterwards. And even while I was in the Marine Corps down in Guantanamo Bay, I was in a play down there. So the storytelling and the dramatic arts, along with the music, that's always been there. And for me, reading and literature had always been a big part of my life. We didn't get to watch TV or go to movies when we were kids, and really rock music was uh, frowned on, and the devil,
Right.
the devil's music.
That's right.
Oh no.
Of course, we listened to it whenever we could on the side.
Good.
But we didn't have many forms of entertainment available to us, but one that was allowed was pretty much anything out of the local library. So
Good.
that's where I discovered the outside world, was in through not just boys' detective fiction and adventure novels and so forth, but I got into some of the more serious literature fairly early on.
How old were
In
you?
early teens, I was reading Hugo and Dumas and a lot of 19th century swashbuckling kind of novels and so on.
That's fascinating to me. If you had a relatively morally insular upbringing, it's so much more dangerous to let a kid go to the library than to listen to rock and roll.
Well, that, and I've always thought that was a big mistake on their part, letting me into the library, because that's just it's the window to the outside world. Well, now it's the internet, but it really opened my eyes to all the other, or so many other ways of experiencing the world and history, and it was a wonderful experience. And when I was about 19, I was still working my way out of religion and out of mysticism, kind of step by step, and literature was part of that. And whether it was reading Jonathan Livingston Seagull as part of sort of a mystical, sort of non-Protestant type of religion, and then finally discovering Ayn Rand's work, and how, like Hugo's novels, being very based on a morality, whether it was explicit or implicit. In the storytelling or reading had been so impactful for me and so enjoyable for me growing up. I thought, I really can't think of anything I might enjoy more than writing stories that are meaningful to me. So I decided to give it a shot.
That's really excellent. I mean, I can kind of relate to that as a girl who grew up in the '80s when you really didn't, you had television, you had syndication and reruns of Gilligan Island, but that's about it. And the rest of it, you had to make up your own stories or kind of do your own play work. So it sounds like you had a good opportunity as a child to kind of fill those gaps instead of spectating or consuming, media. You actually created it. So that's really good.
Thanks.
Yeah, as far as any nonfiction books that may have helped you in your artistic career or in your thinking as an artist, nonfiction books, obviously the Romantic Manifesto comes to mind, but I'm also thinking, things like, The Artist's Way, Drawing on the Right Side of the Brain, Lateral Thinking by Edward de Bono, or any other, nonfiction. I'm just curious.
Sure. Rand's Artifiction.
Yep.
Even, let's see, my senior year in high school was a English and literature class, and we were already talking about structure of stories a bit then. But I think largely from, like with music, just having experienced so much literature in one form or another, the basic storytelling is all there. And if you're paying attention, when something's working or it's not working, or what you really liked about a scene that you just read, or what started to get boring, or by the time you closed the last page of the book, it's like, well, why the hell was that character there? That didn't add up to anything. And having all of that deep experience with as much literature as I did, literature that I really enjoyed, none of it, or hardly any of it, pressed on me by anyone, whether it was high school teachers or religious folks too much. Although I did have to read the Bible all the way through a couple times.
Yeah.
Yeah, just a couple times. Well, I guess that's something.
Yeah. Well, it was something to brag about back then.
Wait, is that when you say that? Are you talking about the Old Testament and the New Testament?
Yeah, every single word.
Oh boy,
all the begets.
jolly.
Yeah. So I knew what didn't work with storytelling.
You had a foil.
Yeah. But I didn't do too much extra reading for learning how to write fiction. I've done some over the years, but with painting, I can't recall too many of the sources that stuck out. I would draw and pull from different things from different authors and different books. And you could go to any physical library today and the sections on how to draw, how to paint, and there's a ton of it out there. And it really not that much different than what any instructor in a studio could give you, although they can look at what you're doing and tell you how to shift and adjust and what you might be trying to do differently and so on. And that's a great way for a lot of people to learn. I think from having been taught a lot of things that I found out weren't true later, when I was growing up, I became very independent when it came to my education.
Good.
And so I really became a self-learner and self-taught on a lot of things, and doing things at my own speed, learning things my own ways. And I discovered very early on that I could learn a lot just by doing and by reading.
Yep.
And I was making enough progress right off the bat when I started painting that, okay, I can tell where I am, and if I keep doing this, I'm going to keep getting better at it. And that happened pretty rapidly. There are wonderful, wonderful books out there. I wish I had my art library at hand, but and some of them are tomes. There's art and materials book by a mayor. Where is it? I had that pulled up just by. Let's see if I still have it. Nope, don't have it on my. Thought I had it on my screen over here, but.
Well, if you find it later, we can. Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. If you find that book later, maybe we can put that in the show notes. So.
Sure.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, let me ask you this real quick. Do you mind if I ask another question, Robert? I know Robert has a list of questions, and I have a list of questions.
You go right ahead.
Thank you.
Between the two of us, Amy is the artist.
I'm the artist.
I've got to give her extra leeway.
If you can tell by my questions.
The artist's leeway.
Yes. So, what do you find more engrossing? Okay, so for instance, when I draw or when I've painted, I lose track of time. I can stay up, to 5, 6 in the morning and have no exhaustion whatsoever. At least that's for me. I'm wondering if that has either writing or the visual arts has that kind of effect on you. Perhaps.
For me, the visual arts more, depending on what stage I'm at in a painting. But if things are rolling along, sure, go for hours and hours and hours, and it doesn't feel like work. And the same thing can be true for me with writing. If a scene is working the way it should, the last thing you want to do is stop.
Right.
It's really. I think you had sent a couple of questions ahead of time that I was thinking through, and one of them being moments that I may have created that I've enjoyed the most, or the most meaningful, or the ones I go back to. And,
yes.
and thinking, well, that's for me. It's really in the process when it first happens.
Oh yeah.
It's when it's most enjoyable.
That's where the magic is.
That's where, yeah, and it's when a line or two of dialogue comes together, or you figure out some little action that will just be so meaningful in that moment, that you've been building up to, and you discover it, and you find a way to concretize it, and that is about as rewarding as almost anything in life for me.
That's fantastic.
It is, and it's and it called to mind the quote from Rand that I've posted once or twice recently, about life being about exalted moments, and she talks about that when she's describing why the dialogue, those first two lines of dialogue between Galt and Dagny in the Gulch, when she looks up at him and says, "We never had to take any of this seriously, did we?" And there's a little, essay or letter that it was in a letter, I think, that she wrote to someone about how the real meaning of it all is in those exalted moments that you find, or the ones that you can reach, the ones that you can achieve, and it being shocking, I'm sure, to a lot of people that she would describe those two lines as the most meaningful in the entire novel, and say, "Well, this is what it's all about." But it's a state of doing what we're designed to do as humans, and that's achieve things, experience things.
Right.
And it's not all the politics and all the trying to maintain our independence when everybody's trying to get you to sacrifice, and having to worry about who's rioting, or whether or not your community is going to get burned down or not, or who's going to be elected next. It's the creating, the loving, the doing, the living, the thing, when you're not having to worry about all of that. Now, of course, we do have to worry about a lot of that, but just reading the letters of John Adams and Abigail Adams, and
yes.
finished with that volume again, and he's the one who wrote something about having to study war in order to because he wasn't a warrior, but he was saying, all right, well, I'm going to have to go out to battle with everybody else. So he popped open a book. I'm going to learn how to do it. I'm going to have to study war and politics so that my children can study science and technology and farming,
Yes.
so that their children can study the arts and poetry. And so,
Yes.
you know, but the exalted moments I find in creating something, a moment that can be that meaningful to me personally, and it's a totally private thing. It happens when, you know, nobody else is around usually. It ends up being a short story or a novel or what have you, and I get to share it with other people, and I get to hear a lot of wonderful feedback sometimes when somebody comes across something and points it out as being as meaningful to them as perhaps it was to me, but that's all kind of secondary. Just having created the context for myself in which I have that opportunity to do that.
Yes.
Is about as good as it gets.
I know that feeling a little bit, but yeah, it looks like, Robert, you have a question?
Well, real quick, because Linda's got a watch party going on,
very
so
good.
you may not be seeing the same comments.
Okay.
I haven't looked at any of them.
Corey asks, I may have missed this coming late to the party, but did you, Quent, get into art during your time in the Corps? He says, I noticed a lot of grunts that would draw and sketch to help pass the downtime.
Not the visual arts. I was, for the first 3 years that I was in the Marine Corps, I was still on my fighter pilot track, and I had to be or at least it used to be this way. I think it still is. To be a fighter pilot, you have to be an officer. To be an officer, you have to have a college degree. I didn't have a scholarship or any money coming out of high school. One of the better ways to have the opportunity to be a pilot in the military is to go through one of the academies, and if you're within the top, or again, it used to be this way, if you graduate within the top X%, and you choose the path that you want to take, and so I managed to get accepted to the Naval Academy. That was about, by the time that process took between years 2 and 3 in the Marine Corps, but it was just after that I decided that after spending a week with the first year kids at the Naval Academy, it was going to be like boot camp all over again for a whole year. And it's just, I think my creative side was starting to want an outlet a lot more. And there was just many other things that were coming together at that time in my life that straight, very narrow path that I would have had to take to become a pilot just wasn't as enticing as it had been when I was a kid and saw the Blue Angels flying around at air shows and things. So I didn't do much art except a little bit of theater when I was in the Marine Corps, and really didn't do hardly any visual art creation at all until after I was out. So I got a pretty late start in my arts career. It was almost mid-20s before I got rolling on both the writing and the painting. So
Well,
I did everything the wrong way.
Oh no, but you did it. That's what counts. And so now we have Jim Ashley. We have a question from him. He says, "Hi, Quent.
Hi, Jim.
Hi, Quent. Something I've always been interested in is how the work an artist does in one field is like the work he does in another. Can you identify for us anything in your literary technique that is equivalent to or corresponds with your painting technique? An example might be how the sentences you write when telling a story are like how you paint a certain small but important detail in a picture."
Sure. it always fascinates me how with doing both painting and writing and listening to music. I don't create hardly any music, but how the aesthetics are I wouldn't even say similar. It's really the same aesthetics beneath all of the
Mm-hmm.
I think just about all of the media, the different types of media. Of course, you've got the extra dimension of time when you're talking about music or drama, literature of any sort, which makes it a very different animal than sculpture or painting. And it's one of the reasons I gravitated more probably to writing than to painting. It takes me longer to get to those exalted moments in painting, and I can't do quite as much of the kind of thing I enjoy doing most with a painting that I can do with writing. But I often feel like when I use that word "feel" very carefully because people use it far too much these days. Instead of saying "I think," I think something. Oh, I feel that such and such. No, but
no,
really,
yeah.
the real meaning of the word. It often feels when I'm writing that I'm trying to paint something with words, and vice versa. When I'm painting, I'm trying to write something on canvas, tell a story that different. You're just using different material to do it with. And it's often frustrating on both sides that I can't say more with oil on canvas than I do. I could make one scene, but it's a still frame in time.
Right.
I can suggest a lot. I can infuse it with a lot, but it's limited in what I can do. Most people don't think of literature or the English language of all things as being limited in any way. But oh my God, it is. If you've ever tried to put together 4 or 5 sentences and you're trying to describe a scene and do it in the most efficient, effective way possible, we have a very limited number of tools to work with to do that. Now you combine them all in different ways, but there's still only X number of words available to you. And with literature, there's a temporal confinement that you have as you're going through phrase by phrase, sentence by sentence, paragraph by paragraph. You have X amount of time with the reader's mind to get something done. You can't spend 5 pages describing, well, if you're a naturalist, I suppose you can. Some authors have done it and somehow gotten away with it, but you don't want to be spending 2 pages describing something that's of minimal importance, but still needs to be described. So there are a lot of restrictions that you have, even with writing literature. And at times, and this is probably where a few of my stories have made it into screenplay or stage play format, is that film is a lovely combination of those two things. You can do things quickly and in terms of telling story all at the same time, and combine painting and writing. I've thought I really wish I could hang around for another 200 years or so, because I think that there will there'll be more and more tools available for a single artist to be able to create the kind of things that you see now perhaps only in the really good, like the Japanese anime. The storytelling that can be done almost like or the way Disney's kind of started with the cartoons, with the painted backdrops and so on. You can get a moving painting. The problem was with the characters, and that's much harder to do. But hopefully there will come a point where a storyteller can do something visually that will be closer to what a classical music composer can do with a whole symphony with all of the tools. And
that's an interesting thought, that there are much more ambitious levels to reach given what's possible now.
I think there is. And I think we'll see more and more of that. We've seen some incredible things they can do digitally now with Toy Story and so on with animation.
Yep.
But it's just not as stylized yet. When you look at something like that, it's some of it's more stylized, some of it's not. But I think there are heights to be achieved that, you know, some that, and it may be may very well be done in virtual reality, where it's more like a stage play that you're experiencing around you, which you're getting with gaming now and so on. But it will be fully stylized.
Yep.
The way an artist would do with painting or with literature and so on. It's just, it'll get there, I think. I'm not sure I'll be around for it.
Oh, well.
That's a whole conversation we could have of what would you do if there were no limitations?
Right.
You know, not just in art, but in other areas of life as well. But there are two questions that I've got to ask, or the listeners will revolt. The Idolatry series, and you anticipated this earlier, you mentioned it. 5 novels representing a much longer work than your short stories and poetry and the outstanding compilations. Part 1, Genesis, released in 2014. Part 2, A New Eden, in 2016. For those of us who are eager to read the next book in the series, can you confirm whether you plan to complete the series and give us a hint when we might anticipate the next release?
I'm going to talk about the context of the answer to that question before I attempt to answer it. It's been difficult to convey to people that that even though we call it a series, it's really not a series. It's a 5-part novel. It's just one big story, and so the first 2 acts are out there of the 5-part play.
Well, it's
the 5-act play.
It's good you're sharing that, because for folks who haven't read it yet, at least so far, Part 1 and Part 2 take place in entirely different time periods. Yes,
there's a connection. Well, there's more than one, but there is connection in 2 back to Part 1. There will be more connection as parts 3, 4, and 5 certainly come together, and absolutely in 5. Part 1, Genesis, serves as an overture to the story. The theme is all there. The question is asked, if not explicitly, then implicitly. The question is asked that will be answered by the time we get to the climax in 5. And then as we get into Part 2, which would really be more like Act 1 of a 5-act, 4-act play, we start to set up the context for what will come in 3, 4. What I've been doing since I completed 2, I thought I was going to be able to produce these much more quickly than I have, but I discovered that there was more work I had to do in figuring out how some things would move into Part 5 and through Part 5 that I thought I had a handle on, and I didn't. There were things that needed to be thought through more clearly and planned more clearly before I wandered off in Part 3 and got myself painted into a corner that I couldn't get out of. Yeah, as much as anyone, I hope, I want everything in a work of art, and this 5-part piece will function as a single work of art, to be as well integrated as possible with nothing in it that doesn't add up to the end, and with everything in it that is needed to add up to the end. So, or to the whole, rather. So unfortunately, it's taken a lot more work than I was expecting, and a lot more study in some areas that I hadn't yet done as much in as I needed to, including, believe it or not, the reading of the Adams letters back and forth to each other to get a little bit more of the flow of the language of the late 1700s, early 1800s, things that will start coming into play in part 3.
It's a question I was going to ask if we had time, and I don't want to make you answer something that you feel like you want to give a very long answer to, but it seems, I'm wondering, did you have to learn more art history or religious history?
Religious history, I learned a fair bit about as I was working my way out of Pentecostalism when I was in my teens. I worked my way out of kind of a fundamentalist Protestant sect to a more general type of that particular niche of religion, out to Protestantism in general, out to Christianity, which would include Catholicism and Protestantism and a number of other variations, Mormonism-ish, and then out to more Judeo-Christian, including the Jewish faith and Islam, and just kind of working my way out through working my way out through the skins of the onion, so to speak, all the way out to mysticism, and then finally discovering what actually is real and works. So I learned a lot of the religious history there. Had to go back and learn more. Going through history of philosophy was necessary and very important. Leonard Peikoff's lecture series on that happens to be very good. I completed that this past year. I needed that.
Nice.
Because a lot of what I'm doing in the story references that. Again, at least implicitly. So history, philosophy, art history, of course, I've gotten a fair bit of over the past couple of decades with the gallery and studying what I have with that. My editor, Diane Durante, she's an art historian, PhD, and she's been a great help. And some of the courses that she's produced have been a very good help with that.
Yeah.
To bring that answer back around to answering your other one, which, to be fair, I have to at least provide an answer, and that's that I'm not going to say.
Wait, what was the question?
Well, we've said before. Sometimes the answer is, I don't know.
I have a date and a series of dates in mind, but that has collapsed around me so many times that I'm not going to put myself and everybody else through that again, and it just creates more stress on me than I already put myself through to begin with. But I used to joke when Linda will appreciate this. She tells the story that when we were dating before we were married, and whenever I'd be asked, well, when are you two getting married? And I would always say, 12 months after the last person asked me about it. So,
just reset the clock again.
Just reset the clock every time you ask. So, no, I appreciate it, and I love that the readers who have enjoyed part 1 and part 2 as much as they have. I know that they're impatient, and rightly so, and nobody more so than I am, and hopefully we can get 3, 4, and 5 out there and much tighter or much closer schedule than the first 2 have been. But hopefully I've got all the pieces in place now. We can move forward more quickly.
I hope you're flattered that you have earned our impatience.
Yes.
No more pandemics, though. No more pandemics. No more shutdowns.
Well, that was going to be the other question that I absolutely had to ask. We talked to Linda about current events at the gallery and the downright heroic manner in which you and Linda have faced these matters head on, from challenging the lockdowns to working through the sometimes nefarious pushback to then weathering the current protests and demonstrations. So how are you doing as the worst of this year's challenges, at least hopefully the worst of this year's challenges, are winding down? Are there any moments that stand out for you which were especially interesting or of which you're most proud?
I hope it's winding down. I'm not letting up my guard, though. There's still, even Tuesday, let's see, this coming Tuesday here, our Board of Supervisors are going to have a meeting on whether or not they want to start cracking down and fining businesses and individuals on not doing things the way that they're dictating they should be done. Up to $5,000 fines for the businesses if they're not towing the line the way that the government wants the line towed.
This is not trivial. These are not nuisance numbers.
And I think the economic fallout is, well, let's not get into negatives. To answer your question on the proudest moment, I think the one of biggest import for us was when I wrote the initial declaration of what we were going to do, when we were going to do it, why we were going to do it, and Linda and I decided, are we going to do this? Because if we're going to do this, we're not going to back off of it. And having some inkling of what was coming when I hit the send button and sent it to the local newspaper, that was a proud moment, not because it was an achievement, but it was a principled defense of something that had to be defended, and that was everything we've done over the past 2 decades to get us where we are, and to be at the risk of losing that and to fail to say we have the right to live, to our life, to our livelihood. Mm-hmm. And no, we're not going to sacrifice everything on this altar that just continues burning and just keeps taking more and more victims, including more and more businesses and, unfortunately, victims of the virus as well. But it became clear that, at least in our state, the strategy had shifted from what absolutely, at least in a lot of people's minds, what had to be done as an emergency had shifted into, well, how much can we sacrifice for how long? Mm-hmm. And I grew up with altars, and I'm just wasn't going to walk towards that one, and not anymore. And we've got, my life means too much to me. Linda's means too much to her. The gallery, all of our artists, 30 artists, that's all. That's everything to us. And and the novel is everything to us. To me, and to Linda. My entire life is built up to this, and I'm not going to sit at home with my hands tied and watch it all go away. Mm-hmm. Just no. And to have stood up and said what we said, knowing that we were going to get the kind of blowback that we got, I was proud of us for that. I still am, and I always will be.
That's something to be proud of. That's for sure. You guys handled it with the most graciousness and the most both intelligence,
the
most
action and
passion,
the letter was so well written.
So good.
Links to that were in last week's show notes. I'll make sure they're in this week's as well.
Yes.
Thank you.
If anybody hasn't read that letter yet.
We have I believe a friend of yours named Sam Axton. He has a question for you.
Sure. Hi, Sam.
He says, Quent, can you express to us the theme you were working with in the painting Molly's Swing behind you in your office there?
That's Molly's Swing. If anyone hasn't seen it yet, that's a print of it. There's a pretty decent, we have prints of it available as well in the gallery, www.cordair.com. And I have a section in the gallery of my work, mostly prints available now. Molly's swing. Um, I'd always enjoyed swings growing up when I was a kid. It's just that one of the first senses of flight that you can get, um, and sense and a sense of weightlessness as well, and to be able to control that too. I mean, you can push yourself higher and higher, and you know you get the little zero gravity up at the top, and swings were always a great deal of fun and challenging when you know the higher the swing was, or we had a couple of places where we lived when we were kids where there would be a slope going down, and you know you get that extra height when there's a slope down and away, whether it was a tire swing or and I at some point I just let's just go with the ultimate swing theme and make that an invitation and a challenge at the same time. And it's been fascinating to me. The same thing's kind of happened with my lunch break painting, and I totally understand people with a fear of heights. It bothers them, and there's some people have very rational fear of heights. But I made very strong ropes on the swing. The swing is solid, the seat's solid, the branch is solid. So it's been very interesting, the responses. Some people love it. Some people can't stand it. Some people ask some very strange questions and say some things that aren't appropriate about it. Rather macabre things, unfortunately. But I still love it to this day. To me, it's a man-made. So it's a visual opportunity, and I think it evokes that childhood. You know, when you're running to the playground and you see the swing, and you know what a swing feels like, and you know that within a few minutes you're going to get to be on that swing, and maybe somebody's pushing you, and gosh, we used to jump out of them. We used to do all sorts of crazy things.
Oh yeah, you used to twist. You can even go over the bar if you want.
Exactly. But it was our first airplane. It was our even before you could fly down the street on a bicycle with any speed at all. You could swing and just get that. You know, you're off the ground for the first time, and getting to feel what flight is like.
You know, and I really do love that, and thank you for explaining that, your perspective on it, and I do feel the same way. I see it as the idea that you cannot have joy in life, you cannot achieve joy unless you accept a challenge, unless you take a risk. Sam says, he says, I see a challenge and an adventure. So that's right. For sure. I mean, I'd be on that swing. I might wear gloves to hold on extra tight. but
if, you're just swinging yourself and you're not worried about anybody pushing you off or anything, it would be a wonderful feeling.
It would be.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and one other thing I just wanted to say, I know we're kind of wrapping up here, but and I just want to say thank you again. I want to kind of reread the question that I know that you answered, that I was actually very proud of asking, which was, have you ever created a work where you feel as if you've given yourself emotional fuel, like a moment of love for existence, like metaphysical joy or self-actualization, or maybe just something you keep going back to that puts a smile on your face, where you feel like your heart is singing? And
that is such a wonderful question.
Thank you. And I felt very happy asking that and putting that question together and asking that, because I certainly have felt that way in some instances of my life and in my creations, and it's not even just painting or music or dance that I involve myself with. It's It could be, putting together a conference for our Great Lakes objectivists. It can be moments of just pure elation that you've created something and you're very proud of it, and you did it, and it's your world, and it's colored by you, and it's so. I honestly, Quent, I wish you more moments of that in your life. And I wish, of course, our audience more moments of that as well.
Thank you. For me, that's what art is for. Not only the experiencing of it, but the creation of it. Those moments that you talk about, that's what I live for in art, and I get them a lot. For me, I don't even want to bother creating anything that doesn't give me that, because it's available, it's and it's accessible and it's achievable, and the more you do it and the better you get at it, the more of those moments you can create and reach, and it's just it can absolutely make you cry while you're doing it, or when you go back to it years later. And yeah, I think I remember the first time I was listening to Robin Field's reading of, I think it was the last chapter of part 1 of Genesis, and I could barely listen to it. It was that powerful to me to be able to hear my words spoken the way that he spoke them, as you got down to the last paragraph of that of that story, and several other scenes as well in part 2. For me, were just about as magical as they could be. And why not? Yeah. If you're an artist, boy, if you're not living for that, then I think you might be in the wrong business.
That's fantastic. That's beautifully said, Quent. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you both.
And yeah.
Well, our 5 minutes are almost up here.
Yep.
So I'm going to jump, if you don't mind, and stay with us. But I'm going to jump right to today's homework.
Okay.
And this will go back to some of the conversation we had with Linda as well, and back to Quent Cordair Fine Art, the gallery. Your homework is to look at your living space. Everybody out there, look at your spaces, your home, your office, your bedroom, any other space you spend a substantial amount of your time. Identify one change you could make which would make it better, and then take action. So since talking to Linda, for example, I've been looking at my own home and the art that's in my home and thinking I need some upgrades. So if you're looking around and you're thinking that too, take action. And my Post-it note for the week, because every week we have a Post-it note that we have you put on your bathroom mirror, your refrigerator, someplace you will see it several times during the week, and help you to move in a direction you want to move. My Post-it note for the week just says, just get to step 2. So you see how that relates to your homework. And the challenge of taking action. The biggest challenge of taking action is step 1. That first action, that first thing that you do, even if it's the simplest thing in the world, because you have the sense that this now leads to the grind, this leads to the work, this leads to the challenge. And if there's some reason you haven't taken that action yet, there's something in there that's giving you resistance. Mm-hmm. So just get to step 2, which means get through step 1, but don't think that much about it. Just bulldoze through that first bit. Get to step 2. I found this a useful strategy several times. Probably going back to Mary Poppins.
Oh.
Who said, once begun is half done.
Uh-huh.
So get started.
Yes, get
through step 1, get to step 2.
Get the momentum going. Yes.
Yes. And with that said, quick reminders. Mm-hmm. The show notes, including links not only to Quent Cordair Fine Art at Cordair.com, but to information on Quent Cordair's art at QuentCordair.com. All of those links, all of those notes are going to be posted on the show notes right after the episode. For you folks who...
right?
I'm sorry? And
we're giving away signed books.
We will. And it turns out we've got some last-minute subscriber changes, so we're not prepared to do the sweepstakes during the show. We will do it right after the show.
Yes.
We'll print up the updated list of subscribers. And in that regard, we apologize to the folks who subscribe to YouTube and then had to jump back to Facebook. I don't know what the technical issues are with YouTube. Everybody's live on Facebook now. We will get that show downloaded and I'll upload it again. You will be able to watch it on YouTube as well.
We need to sacrifice to the YouTube gods.
The 3 books by Quent Cordair.
Yeah.
We will announce the sweepstakes winner shortly after the show.
And they're signed.
They're signed. They're
signed.
autographed by the author, which is
So
the best way to
amazing.
get a book. It really is the best. I must admit, I take in Quent's work on Kindle. But
That's good. Kindle's good.
But there's nothing like paper.
No.
And paper signed by the author. It doesn't get any
Yes.
better than that. So if you
I'll
are
sign your Kindle next time I'm out.
right on the screen with permanent marker, so I'll never forget. So if somehow you are not already subscribed, go to youtube.com/Robert Nasir, hit the subscribe button before we do the sweepstakes and announce it this evening,
Yep.
and we will get that show uploaded.
Yeah, we'll have that ready in about 15 minutes after the show.
Or so.
And we've got lunch break, right? We have My Kingdom and Other Poems, Short Stories, and Plays, and the Idolatry,
Yes, part
part
one,
one,
Genesis. So those 3 works will be in somebody's hot hands, or 3 people's hot hands, shortly, as quickly as we can get it announced, and then Quent and Linda can make that happen for you. If you want to support the show, patreon.com/Robert Nasir. Enough said about that. If you have any comments or questions, make sure that you post them to the 5 Minutes with Robert Nasir Facebook group. And thank you so much, Quent. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
You've broken the record, the longest 5 minutes we've had yet, because you were too interesting. So cut that out. And really, thank you. This was outstanding. Talking to you and talking to Linda has been one of the high points of our 19 episodes so far. Outstanding.
Yes, it's been very inspirational for me, and I mean, I
Can
thank
we
you,
continue
Quent.
this? Can we continue this at dinner tonight somehow?
Well, we've done virtual dinners with folks over Zoom, and since
Yeah.
you're in California and we're in Michigan, that might be the most practical way to make that happen. We will find you after the show.
Yes.
In the meantime, everybody who has watched and listened and given such positive responses to these interviews, the first 2 interviews we've done on 5 Minutes with Robert Nasir, thank you so much.
And Amy Nasir, too.
And Amy Nasir, too. I don't know, I might have to change the show title. My co-host is feeling neglected.
No, you could just...
Everybody comes here to see Amy. Nobody's here for me. Which is, I guess, leads to the question, well, why don't you change the name of the show then? We'll think about
It's
that.
all the hats.
Again, thank you all for being here. Thank you, Quent. And
Yeah,
as
thank you.
always, we wish each and every one of you success and flourishing and inspiration through the consumption of outstanding art. And we wish you each love.